Okay, let's begin. My name is Tengiz and Kashagan. I'm director of the program on Central Asia here at the Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies, and I'm very excited to welcome you today and to open the second graduate student conference on Central Asia hosted by the Davis Center. In the program, you had Dr. Alexandra Bakru as our first speaker. She wanted to give some welcoming remarks to you, but she had an unexpected trip. So I'll have the pleasure to pass the greetings from her and from our faculty director, Dr. Yves Blau. Both directors support the program on Central Asia very much, and what can show it better than the funding that we received to hold this conference. This is the second conference. The first we had last year, and it was a lot of fun. I think those of you who were here last year can confirm that, and the fact that you are here again, so also a good sign. We had almost 100 applications. So it's a very competitive process. You are the best of the best, and I'm sure our conference will be even better than last year in terms of content. Well, the way we approach the conference is we first define the three themes, and then we kind of try to select the papers that give the most interesting perspectives on that theme. And this year we chose three themes. One is in and out of Central Asia, rise of connectivity. And we wanted to discuss the region's evolving role as a critical bridge between various global forces, especially in the context of the Russia-Ukraine war. The second theme we chose is state and society, a new social contract, question mark. And there we wanted to examine the political dynamics, societal expectations, emerging social contracts in Central Asia's evolving authoritarian regimes. And the third theme is inspired and inspiring hybrid identities in Central Asia. And there we wanted to look at the region's rich multi-ethnic diversity, cultural dynamics, and the legacy of the Soviet policies. So we built the conference around these three overarching themes, and I'm sure we will learn a lot from each other. And I also hope that here some really nice, interesting partnerships will be formed, because I think that's the best part of the conference, right? Meeting people and exchanging, and then continuing these partnerships afterwards. Since we are all Central Asians, or people who studied Central Asia, spent a good amount of time there, and you know about the tradition of a blessing in Central Asia, how important it is to have an elder, wise, respected person to give a blessing, right? And well, in Kazakh it's bata, and you couldn't find a better person than Ambassador Thomas Simons here, who is a scholar, a practitioner, diplomat, who worked with the region, on the region, and also a long-time resident at the Davis Center. Ambassador Simons is currently visiting scholar here at the Davis Center. He has a BA from Yale, and we have actually some Yale colleagues here. Welcome. And he got his MA and PhD from Harvard. During a 35 years of service, he specialized in East-West relations, including service in Warsaw, Moscow, and Bucharest, and as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State responsible for Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union during the crucial years between 1986 and 1988. 1989. And during the 1990s, he was US ambassador to Poland, coordinator of US assistance to the newly independent states of the former Soviet Union, and US ambassador to Pakistan. Ambassador Simons, Professor Simons is the author of dozens of articles on the European East, Eurasia, and the subcontinent, and of 4 books, including Eurasia's New Frontiers, Young States, Old Societies, Open Futures. And let me stop here. The bio is very long, but I want to draw your attention to the series of essays that, together with Ambassador Simons and Ambassador Kroll, we're putting together. These are memoir essays by US diplomats who worked in Central Asia, and we published them together with EurasiaNet.org. And actually, our keynote speaker, Ambassador Van, actually yours is the last one, the last piece we published, and it's a really amazing, fun piece to read, and it's called "Clinching." Okay, I have it here. Memoir "Clinching the Baku-Ceyhan Pipeline." And you will not regret if you look for it. You will and read it. You will definitely not regret. You will thank me for this. And okay, without further ado, let me go. Yeah, go for some words of that.
Yeah, check out my white beard here. Yeah, for short remarks, that was embarrassingly long introduction, but Nargis, thank you, and thank you for having me here. During that 35-year career in the Foreign Service, I was in Central Asia for the first time as a visitor in December 1976, so Brezhnev times. And then in the 90s, often in those magical first years of independence, as assistance coordinator, and I tried to keep up ever since. And the Davis Center and Nargis's program is an important way for me to do that. I think your conference, now that it's entered its second round, that means it can go on forever. But I think it will mark the coming of age of studies on Central Asia, of scholarship on Central Asia, in American academia. Most of the papers that we're going to hear are historical. That's the nature of the material, the archives. And there's nothing wrong with that. History lies heavily on the region. And I think we meet at a moment with the war in Ukraine and the attack on the Crocus Town Hall outside Moscow. A moment that reminds us of just how heavy history is in the region. But the war in Ukraine is not just about the past. It arouses new fears and new hopes in Central Asia, and it's spurring new American interest in the region. And you are at the crossroads of the past and the future. You are the future of scholarship on Central Asia in this country. Your scholarship is going to nourish that new American interest in the region in the best possible way through in-depth understanding of a complicated, rich, and increasingly important part of the world. It's also a delight to introduce your keynote speaker. Ambassador Mann and I have been colleagues and friends for 40 years, since we worked together on the old Soviet desk in the State Department. And he's gone on to be probably the American who has done most, who's been most responsible for supporting Central Asia's young independence by broadening its options in the energy field. he really is living proof of what American diplomats can do if they're smart enough and experienced enough and courageous enough. So you're in for a real treat with his talk.
Okay, goodness, thank you very much. Let me express my warm appreciation to the Davis Center, especially to the wonderful Nargis and Laura Sargent and the rest of the team. And goodness, what an introduction from my archidog, Tom Simons. So I've been honored to follow in his footsteps for these many years. And honored also to be part of the State Department group that had the good fortune to work over that span of years. In diplomacy, we play a team sport. And I have been incredibly fortunate to be a part of that team with Tom. This conference is a valuable event. Central Asia is a rich expanse. Humanity is the richer if we can help preserve and prosper Central Asian traditions and culture and knowledge. So let me start with this word of honestly warm thanks to every scholar in this room. Now, as advertised, this is a talk about energy, but I hope it's going to be about a wider complex of issues. And I'm going to start with the historical frame of reference. As Tom alluded, I'll start by going back 45 years ago when I first traveled to Central Asia. And like Tom, I was a foreign service officer assigned to our embassy in Moscow. And this was the favorite assignment of my career, to be in the Soviet Union, in Moscow, in the Brezhnev years. And we covered the expanse of the USSR from Brest to Baku to Sakhalin. And those were special years to be a Westerner in the USSR. We were relatively few, and we Americans, and I'm sure Europeans as well, felt that we stood for something. We stood for something good. We represented the principles of democratic choice, of personal liberty, of rule of law in a society that had violated those principles since 1917. Our embassy leadership in those years wanted us to get out and get on the streets and get away from the capital and begin to understand the Soviet Union. And this is what led me in those years to the Turkmen and the Uzbek Soviet Socialist Republics. I can see their flags in front of me as I say those words. Now, let's be clear, I want to be clear, my visits there were facile. I spoke only Russian. I was there only briefly, although we had work tasks to fulfill on every visit. We did market price surveys to track the local economies. We bought local newspapers and books to ship back to our analysts and experts in the US so that they could have a deeper understanding. We also met with local members of the human rights monitoring groups in those Helsinki years. But those were few indeed in Central Asia. I remember trying to track down the one member of the Helsinki monitoring group in Ashgabat, and it was impossible. So our focus when we traveled out there was not on energy. Central Asia was late off the mark to oil and gas development compared to its neighbors. Baku started producing oil in 1846, and an 800-kilometer long pipeline stretched from Baku to Batumi in 1907, whereas Kazakhstan, the Kazakh region, only started producing oil in 1911. And so also with Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, the hydrocarbons were there, but it wasn't until the 60s and the 70s that the Soviets came around to real hydrocarbon development in Central Asia. Because the Soviet energy industry in those years was far more oriented towards the Urals and West Siberia. But Central Asia had a role, and Moscow and the geopolitics of that era decided that the production of Central Asian oil and gas would flow up and would supply through rail transport and through long pipelines the Soviet industrial and population heartland in Russia and Ukraine. And so just a note here, I am going to be talking mostly about the winners of the geological lottery. And those winners in Central Asia are Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and to a lesser degree, Uzbekistan. And then there are points that I'll be making about Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. So Central Asia's oil and gas production grew as the Soviet years progressed, although in the 70s and then in the 80s, the constraints of Soviet economics became clear. It became ever more clear in terms of technology, managerial skill, environmental protection, investment funds, and the destructive effects of central planning. Expanding production from those existing levels would be hard. North Caspian oil is high pressure, high sulfur oil. And this means really severe technical challenges, even in the current day, for development and production. And the size of the fields in the Kazakh and the Turkmen republics also required billions of dollars in investment. And this was more easily harnessed from international banks than from limited Soviet hard currency reserves. Now, just a little note here also for the non-energy specialists in the room, this will be a small hydrocarbon point. When we talk about hydrocarbons, we talk about oil and gas, there are three categories of them. The upstream is where the molecules come out of the ground. The downstream is where the consumer uses those molecules, either in a refinery or turning on a gas burner. And in between is the midstream, the transport of those hydrocarbons to where they can be monetized and used. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is the midstream. So this was the situation in the Soviet years, and then in 1991, epochal change. When the independence era arrived, certainly those of us as diplomats, like the world, thought it was a great thing to see the Soviet republics become nations able to chart their own course, chart their own destinies, and seek commerce, assistance, and friendship outside of the bounds of the Soviet sphere. But it was a hard transition, first of all, because it was abrupt. And secondly, and these I'm only listing a couple of the factors here that made it so tough, the entire structure of the newly independent states started out as Soviet, with centralized power, with a strong role for the coercive apparatus. And the state became a great prize to be fought over by elites. So those early 90s were unsettled. Some of you will remember, some of you experienced the brutal edge that accompanied independence, the end of the Soviet social safety net, the end of the structure of production and employment as everyone had known it for decades. And even today, I know we've probably everyone has had this experience, driving from city to city in the former Soviet Union, seeing the shells of the factories, seeing the impoverished factory towns that no longer have an economic rationale for existence, compared to the way that the Soviet government thought about investment and production. So then, what to build an economy on? For the oil and gas-rich states, the answer was unavoidable. There were fields under production, but much more to be developed. And here was the excitement of new possibilities. So global companies thronged in after the Soviet collapse, led by Chevron, which developed Kazakhstan's supergiant Tengiz oil field. And that's, I'll get to maps and slides in a bit, but for now, that is just a brief glimpse of this massive Tengiz development in Kazakhstan. And in fact, Chevron had begun to take advantage of the liberalizing Gorbachev climate to have discussions about developing Tengiz, even in the late Soviet era. And in independence, fortunately, Kazakhstan had a dynamic and smart leader, Nursultan Nazarbayev. And Nazarbayev, who in those years knew painfully little about how the West worked, still moved decisively to open the doors to Western investment, technology, and managerial skills, while setting in motion the enormous range of reforms needed to attract that investment. New laws on property, banking, immigration, and a reform of the hydrocarbon codes, among so much else. And this was an area where Europe, and especially America, was able to help. And Tom, you must have greenlit these projects yourself. USAID contracted with experts to go out and advise on the legislative drafting of the laws. And the American Bar Association had a robust exchange program with Central Asia to send our lawyers and judges out there and their lawyers and judges back to the US. And all credit to Nazarbayev also for his personnel selections, identifying and empowering technically capable subordinates to work with the foreign investors. And this was especially true in the energy sector. And most of all, and I know I am relating a well-known story, Nazarbayev's Bolshoi program was epical. And I can think of no other policy decision in the former Soviet Union that was as far-sighted as the president's commitment to send thousands of talented students across the world to pursue education for the benefit of Kazakhstan. And today, 30 years hence, when I look at the people occupying responsible positions in the Kazakhstani economy, Bolshevik or non-Bolshevik. It is so impressive that they have taken the best of global education back to Central Asia. So Kazakhstan continued on a powerful path of growth. And the 1990s were tough, but with the opening of the CPC pipeline in 2001, Kazakhstan notched 13.5% GDP growth and powered on through the rest of the decade. So Kazakhstan really is the outstanding resource success. Take a look at this slide. So this shows the rise in Kazakh oil production in the opening years of this century. And it's all the more impressive when you realize that from roughly 2004 onward, there was the beginning of a major run-up in global oil prices, thanks to the rise of China and the huge increase in Chinese GDP. Now, Turkmenistan also had real success in attracting foreign investors, although it got off to a slow start, with Mobil, Shell, Petronas, Total, Eni, and CNPC all showed interest. And consortia were formed to build a trans-Afghan and a trans-Caspian gas pipeline. Now, here's the rise in Turkmen gas production. So in 1992, Turkmenistan was sending very large amounts of natural gas to Russia. And then you see the gradual plunge, both with the decline in the Russian economy and also the options of Russians to market their own gas. And then it starts back up again. There is a recovery in Turkmen gas production going up through the early years of this century. But note that this production still exported everything through these same old gas lines. And I think here's a point at which I want to show the export routes of gas. We don't have any of these fancy laser pointers, do we?
Maybe not. No.
Okay, but you can see that red line. Okay, other informational point in oil and gas maps, green is oil, red is gas. So you see that CAC pipeline system, that is the Soviet legacy system that exported Central Asian gas northwards. And then Uzbekistan had a lesser hydrocarbon industry, but it was still able to bring in the interest of multiple foreign investors. So from obscure economies to potentially powerful and importantly, sovereign economies. This is the way those years played out as we headed through the turn of the century. And my work in those years for the US government was to support new routes to export this oil and gas, to break the old Soviet monopolies of pipelines. Because the Soviet Union had shipped oil and gas up to the industrial heartlands of Russia and Ukraine. You can see CAC pipeline, Adoral-Samara going into Russia. What we can't see here is a major Soviet rail network to transport oil. And in the independence era, this meant that those transport routes were now controlled by the Russian monopolies of Gazprom for gas, Transneft for oil, and Russian railways for rail transport. And they squeezed the producers of Central Asia on transit fees. And that was bad enough economically, but those Russian companies, then as now, were creatures of the Kremlin. And if Moscow wanted to crack the political whip on Central Asia, it had the tools to do it through those export routes. But the US wanted new, strong, independent countries to emerge from this period. And thus, the US created a special envoy position for Caspian Basin energy diplomacy, and that was the work I was doing. For Kazakhstan, the CPC pipeline was the game changer. So you see it running from Tengiz to the Black Sea port of Novorossiysk and thence to world markets. This was then, in those years, legally insulated from Kremlin control. And it has a capacity of, I believe it is now 1.5 million barrels a day, which is a lot of oil. Azerbaijan also created the BTC pipeline. It's a good one, from Baku through to Tbilisi to Ceyhan in the deepwater Mediterranean. And this was Azerbaijan's anchor for independence. But it matters to Central Asia because BTC is an alternate route for exports of Kazakh and Turkmen oil. And paralleling the BTC pipeline is the South Caucasus gas pipeline in the same 100-meter corridor. And this gas pipeline is sending gas across Turkey and into Europe, and it offers the chance for Turkmen gas to link up as well. For Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, the picture was less positive. Energy revenues help you avoid the consequences of bad governance. But they are not a complete shield against bad governance. So you can ask the spirit of Saparmurat Niyazov about this. But Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan did not even have those cushions. And without that energy money, it's an even harder road. But then the lack of natural resources is a two-edged sword. The phenomenon of the resource curse is very well documented. But then on the other hand, if you have few natural resources, well, look at Japan, which has not done badly at all, despite being resource poor. So in sum, these opening years saw two great triumphs: winning the serious attention of foreign investors for upstream development, and the creation of these new export routes to break the old Soviet grip. But after that initial hopefulness, it moved differently. And now we're getting into the tough truths part of my talk. Kazakhstan has continued on a generally positive commercial path, but Uzbekistan under Karimov proved to be an unattractive investment destination. Global companies that were looking at Uzbekistan soon found that the attractive fields had been locked up by Gazprom and other favored companies. And Turkmenistan, under the squirrely Saparmurat Turkmenbashi, had corporate giants treading the red carpeted staircase of his marble palace. But Western investors turned away or were expropriated, and only the Chinese have remained. In 2003, Niyazov changed the investment laws to exclude foreign oil and gas investors. And we're seeing, as many countries have found, that unless you offer attractive investment conditions, there are hydrocarbons elsewhere. Now, what about industrialization to follow on these energy successes? What about that as a path for growth? The problem was and is that Central Asia itself is a small market with two behemoth economies next door. And it also has a tangle of serious trade barriers. And it's very instructive to look at the detailed work on Silk Road trade barriers that Fred Starr did some years back. Another problem that I would note here is the decline in multi-ethnicity. A multi-ethnic Central Asia was Soviet ideology, it was Soviet policy, and it was also the case that technical, professional, and managerial talent from the Soviet heartlands was needed over the decades for the development of Central Asia. With independence, so much was gained with the restoration of ethnic pride, with the strengthening of national languages and traditions and cultures, but much was lost also with the outflow of technical talent. When, for example, you eliminate Russian textbooks from schools and universities, and you don't have the Turkmen textbooks for those subjects that have been created. So in the opening years of the century, the picture was mixed. One of the previous triumphs, but also a picture of clouding hopes. And let me read from a memo. I got this about a month ago. It's now declassified that one of our great diplomats and a Harvard grad, Joe Pressel, wrote in November 2000. We have not been conspicuously successful in meeting our stated goals for the 5 countries. None has come anywhere near to democracy as we understand the term. Indeed, all are going the other way. None has really reformed its economy, nor instituted the rule of law, nor thrown off the psychological, in some case, real dependence on Moscow. It is not a tragedy. We got some real work done in each of the 5. There are genuine achievements of which we can be proud, achievements with both a short and long-term payoff. With luck, we have laid the groundwork for major change, even if over a longer period than Americans are accustomed to use as benchmarks for success. And Pressel then argues that Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan are the most promising of the 5. Treat the 2 governments as adult. We can natter till the end of time about economic reform. They won't go faster than they want to. It probably means half a generation in Kazakhstan, even longer in Uzbekistan. We tell them that we disagree fundamentally on this one. They will discover for themselves when they want to undertake, that is, not just talk about serious reform, we will be there to help. Their decision, it is their business, not ours. And that memo is wise in pointing out to Washington our limits, and also underscoring that Central Asia's destiny rests squarely with Central Asia. So now here we are and the world has changed. What next for Central Asian energy? There are 2 great trends to mark, and the first is the rise of renewables. It's a different world than 25 years ago, and we are seeing things possible that weren't possible before. Solar power in Central Asia is a growing reality. We may see the Rogun and Casa 1000 projects move forward. The second trend, though, is that Central Asia is no longer a focus of oil and gas investment. In the late 1990s, newspaper articles spoke of the region as a second Persian Gulf. But the great prizes are gone. Tengiz, Kashagan, and ACG in neighboring Azerbaijan. And in Uzbekistan, Uzbek gas may be entering a phase of terminal decline. Turkmen gas fields remain enormous and probably with lots of room left to run. But Turkmenistan's policies continue to block international companies from investing. And then there's the serious issue of methane emissions. And that's a NASA image of massive, you can see the scale on the right, massive methane plumes from Turkmen gas fields. For Turkmenistan, the perennial projects of the TAPI pipeline and TCP remain worthy of consideration. So you can see it here. Sorry for this revised slide, but down in the bottom right, you can see in a dotted line the TAPI pipeline, which could be a valuable addition to South Asia's energy mix. But it's not going anywhere, and even the Asian Development Bank may have figured this out. And overall, there's an overarching tough truth. The world of hydrocarbon investment has moved elsewhere. The hot areas right now are Guyana, Suriname, Brazil. So, and back to renewables, will the trend toward renewables and low carbon emissions and net zero affect Central Asia's ongoing economic health? And the answer is it will affect it very little. In terms of natural gas, China's appetite for all forms of energy, including coal, remains strong. And as for oil, reliable projections show that oil will be a critical part of the world economy for decades to come. Global net zero pledges are not credible. So Central Asia will not have to reckon with the bottom falling out of its oil and gas exports, but how to replicate that investment excitement that we saw at the turn of the century. What to do now? And one answer may be critical minerals. This is a picture of a September C5+1 dialogue when the US and the Central Asian nations inaugurated a critical minerals dialogue. Central Asia has 39% of global manganese, 30% of chromium. I had to look this up. This did not come fluently to me, but 20% of lead, 12% of zinc, and Kazakhstan supplies 43% of the world's uranium, more than any other country. But for the region to prosper, it has to go beyond resource extraction. And now into another tough truth. What's different from 25 years ago? It's a more threatening geopolitical picture. So with its invasions of Ukraine following on its territorial grabs in Georgia and Moldova, Moscow, Putin's Moscow, has taken the mask off. And Putin's remarks on Kazakh statehood, those of you who remember that, also do not give reassurance. And let me relate a story here I heard from a diplomat, very skilled American diplomat friend of ours, who was talking to President Nazarbayev in the 1990s. And Nazarbayev told him that he was listening, this is in the 90s, he was listening to Radio Mayak, and he heard Solzhenitsyn being interviewed. And Solzhenitsyn said, yes, we have to, and I'm paraphrasing, we have to strengthen our Russian homeland from the Baltics through to northern Kazakhstan. And Nazarbayev turned to my colleague and said, That was the moment at which I decided to move the capital. Interesting story. So yet Kazakhstan, like all of Central Asia, must prosperously coexist. In this regard, Central Asia is lucky to have robust ties with China. And let's hope that ties to South Asia and Europe can flourish. And transit is an area of promise for Central Asia in the years ahead. And on transit, the threatening posture of Moscow has made it imperative to look at new hydrocarbon export options. So Trans-Caspian pipeline has gotten new life, and Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan have, in small volumes, started to send oil across the Caspian into Azerbaijan. So you see that line coming down from Kurik. Tengiz is just above and a little to the northwest from Kurik. So the old Octal BTC pipeline project may have some life yet. And what of America's position towards the region? That now as then, we reject any idea of a great game. Fundamentally, this notion of geopolitics as a board game is kind of silly. It's not like playing Monopoly, where you try and get as many properties as you can. The world is more dynamical than that. So, but that's not a view that's rejected everywhere, as Moscow is seeking to reestablish a neo-Soviet sway over its former territories. But we see the ways in which all of the Central Asian states have been reaching out in varying degrees to foreign nations with institutions like development banks and agencies. And this diversification geopolitically is a key part of Central Asian national security. Now, I'll end with a tough truth, but good truth. And that's the need for rule of law as Central Asian nations try to fulfill their economic potential. First of all, as global technology change accelerates, are the country's investment and regulatory mechanisms attractive enough and nimble enough to take advantage of what can be done? And on a far more basic level, if you don't have freedom of speech in a country, how can decision makers know what's working and what's not working economically? Without property rights, why is anyone going to invest? Now, in the very big scale, I worked for 11 years for ExxonMobil. I have seen how big companies invest, and they are covered with international arbitration provisions. And they have also first call on the oil and gas sales that they're marketing according to their equity investment. But the most important investment for a country, to attract is domestic investment. You want that small scale shop around the corner. You want your young people to do that small scale startup in your country. And for that, you need rule of law. So there's distance to go. The ratings of Central Asia on the Transparency International and World Bank indices. Sorry, I'm absent from the numbers, but they're easy enough to remember, ranging from Kazakhstan at 25 on the World Bank Ease of Doing Business Index, ahead of China and in the same league with Thailand. And then it goes further and further down until you hit Turkmenistan, which is unrated. And then you have the Transparency International Corruption Perception Index. Here again, Kazakhstan outranks the rest of Central Asia, although the picture is not as rosy. And then you get to the bottom with Tajikistan as 161 out of 180 countries, and Turkmenistan 170. So yes, room for growth. But I'll close now with some optimism. Foremost, for Kazakhstan, with the deaf Kazim-Jomart Tokayev in office, and this capable rising generation coming through the Kazakh economy. I am also hopeful for Uzbekistan in the long haul, following my colleague Joe Pressel's schema. In the long haul, given its sizable and dynamic population, its deep intellectual traditions, and the fact that we are beyond the sclerotic Karimov era. Turkmenistan retains fine potential, but as long as it follows the Niyazov template of governance, it is hard to be optimistic. And finally, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, where the need for political reform dwarfs all other considerations. So I thank you for your kind attention. I wish you well in the conference, and I'm eager to sit in those seats and learn as you speak. Thank you very much.
And you have to proceed here a little bit before you move to the audience.
We have, I think, 15 minutes for Q&A. Can you hear us, or do we need to use the mic? Yeah, okay. Okay. Thank you so much, Steve, for this tour de force presentation that started us so well on our first theme, connectivity in and out of Central Asia. And connectivity can reduce dependencies, but also can increase dependencies. And that's something I wanted to kind of probe a little bit. But please prepare the questions, okay? Let me ask a question, and then I will open the floor. Well, now with the Russia-Ukraine war underway, and the fact that Russia cannot sell gas to Europe and sending it elsewhere, to China, to Central Asia first, does it create more dependencies of Central Asia on Russia? And on the one hand, we're trying to to diversify and sending small volumes at the moment across the Caspian, and we're kind of trying to lure foreign investors. On the other hand, here you don't even need to invest much, right? The Russian gas does come, and we'll be consuming more and more of Russian gas. And the second question related to that, it seems we are competing. Central Asia and Russia are competing now for the Chinese market. And actually, well, I saw the numbers. I don't remember the numbers, but I saw that now Russia supplies more gas to China than Turkmenistan. It overcame as the top supply. What do you think about this competition between Line D and Powers of Siberia 2? Is there a competition? And which pipeline you think has the better chance of being?
Look, it is fascination.
If you want that.
No.
Okay.
I had a conversation with Niyazov it must have been in 2000. And I said, look, the Russians are moving ahead, and they're developing Yamal. They're developing, I think it was Stockmanskoye. They're developing an entire new complex of gas fields. But you have massive fields now. You have an advantage, essentially, to outcompete them into Europe. Niyazov, to part of his character was he had a Bazari mentality. The idea is, if you're bidding for my gas, what I should do is not accept that offer, and I'll just wait, and it will become more valuable. So, yeah, if he had been a seller, a rug seller in the Talkuchka, he would have gone bankrupt. So, and that's what's happened, which is that Russia now finds itself compelled to sell gas cheaply. It's selling gas into Uzbekistan, for goodness sakes. It wants to do a lot of business with China. So it is, it's tough times on the gas sales market if you're a seller.
Mhm.
If you're a buyer,
It's okay.
if you're a buyer of pipeline gas, not LNG, it's a good time
Mhm.
in Eurasia.
Mhm. But we are both the buyers and sellers in Central Asia.
Yeah, well, you want competition.
Uh-huh.
And that would be the ideal for Turkmen gas to be able to compete in a wide variety of markets. I just don't see it happening for the foreseeable future.
Okay.
I mean, the three lines are transporting 55 billion cubic meters. That's a lot of gas. Power of Siberia contributes some, and China wisely insists on a range of diversified supply.
Okay, thank you very much. Rahat, and can you introduce yourself very briefly?
Yeah, name's Rahat. I'm a visiting scholar here at Davis Center. I'm an environmental economist. Thank you very much, Mr. Rahman, for very exciting presentation. I enjoyed it very much, going through the history of the Soviet Union, post-Soviet Union. I have one question. What is your opinion regarding the Central Asian inter-cooperation between states in terms of energy policy? You probably have seen that now that Kazakhstan is investing in the different Central Asian countries, creating a new hydropower plants. Recently, for example, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Kyrgyzstan teamed up. They want to build the largest power plant in Kyrgyzstan by far, and kind of they divided the shareholder to three sides. So, based on your experience, what is the first potential, maybe historical, what was the kind of history cooperation between the Central Asian states internally? And then if you can assess kind of future potential in terms of both energy, maybe trade or economy, the level of cooperation.
We'll do it in a couple of minutes.
No, what a very
Yeah.
good question, and I can answer it, I hope, concisely. First of all, there's a basic problem. There are a couple of basic problems. Central Asia is a small market. So Kazakhstan, for example, has wanted for years to expand its refinery capacity. But where do you sell it? And you have Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, they all have their own, they all want their own refineries. Cooperation among the Central Asian states, it has been on again, off again. There is a lot of, in my experience, a lot of embraces and druzhba between the leaders, but it is not followed through. It's hard to say because you have to separate the declarative, the propaganda parts of it, from the actual economics of it. The economics is kind of a black box between national companies. National companies, oligarchs, and less transparent entities. So I think there is the fundamental reason for trade and cooperation. The taking down of trade barriers, which I believe is starting to happen, is very, very positive. And I think you have China on the one hand wanting to export, wanting to transit Central Asia, and Turkey and the Europeans wanting to do the same. So that's the area where I think cross-border cooperation is the most hopeful.
Okay, thank you. I saw him. Okay.
My name is Alex Ignacy from the University of Bloomington. I am former FSN serving USAID mission in Russia and US Embassy in Moscow. So the question is, Your Excellency, thank you for raising Rowan Dam and Casa 1000. The question is related to them. Will the development of these projects impact the cotton industry in Uzbekistan? Because as a result, there will be no water.
Yeah, this is an area where I'm happy to say you and others in the audience know more than I do. All I know is that you have this inevitable trade-off between water for hydropower and water for agriculture. And by the way, when I was in Turkmenistan, I was shocked to see a satellite photo of the Karakum Canal and the enormous amount of water leakage that comes out from that canal. It is, I can give you no answers, only to say, I appreciate the magnitude of the problem.
And the participants have our calendar in your bags, and it's dedicated to water in Central Asia. And we have some really bad.
I will be in the audience for that one.
Okay, yes.
I'm the visiting scholar here, and I want to know which country has best relationship nowadays with single countries and will keep this kind of relationship in the future.
The relationship with
Which country?
Which country has the best relationship with the single countries nowadays and will keep this kind of relationship in the future?
with stable countries.
With
Stable and best relationship.
who?
Which country? Which country?
With which country? You have
Yeah,
a relationship
which
with
country?
somebody.
So I think in terms of the outreach, Kazakhstan is highly effective in their leadership, their diplomacy, their business people these are people who would be, you pick them up, set them down in London, they would be world class. They're very accustomed to that. And Nazarbayev gave his people the freedom to go out and conduct business and diplomatic relations. That's sort of kind of it. Uzbekistan has, especially under Mirziyoyev, has had a sharp change in outreach. So I'm very hopeful about what Mirziyoyev did when he first took over. Beyond that, it is a more narrow view with the other three countries.
Okay, let's go here. Ethan, and then
My name is.
let's take two questions.
My name is Ethan Joe. I'm a history PhD student at the University of Michigan. And I do some research on critical minerals, so I have a question related to the critical mineral supply chains you also mentioned. I think many people know nowadays, Central Asia's, all this metal mining, the infrastructure was basically, is mostly Soviet legacy, and it has caused a lot of ecological and human problems. And when we talk about investment, right, of course, Asian countries should welcome foreign investment, but if more investments come, going to the mining industry, right, going to this, Soviet era oligarchs, these big companies,
Yeah.
and kind of reinforce this infrastructure, that would probably cause more problems. So what's your perspective on, for example, responsible sourcing in the mineral supply chain in Central Asia? I think that's a crucial question now.
It's a wonderful question. I have 3 points on this. First of all, financing is critical to projects. When you look at certainly oil and gas projects, but minerals to a degree also, the key question is who finances? And if the finance is coming from an international development bank, or even a bank, say like Deutsche Bank or Santander or something, they will have ethical standards for which they're responsible, both to their shareholders and their regulatory authorities. So that's one vote in favor of that type of investment. Secondly, with companies, if you have, I'll use the oil example. If you have Shell investing, Shell is responsible to its shareholders. Its stock price will be affected if there are environmental problems on its watch. Take a look at BP with the Deepwater Horizon. So publicly traded global companies have strong reasons for responsible development. Then there's also the government's regulatory processes, but you have to make sure, it's a nice thing to make sure that the government is regulating for environmental reasons and not for rent seeking.
Okay, yes.
Hi, I'm Matt. I'm a master's student at the University of Oxford. I wanted to ask about how you feel about Kyrgyzstan's recent enactment of the Foreign Agents Bill, and about your feelings about last year in Kazakhstan, where I think it was one of the ministries released a list of foreign funded NGOs, and I wanted to ask about your opinion on that, because you mentioned the importance of transparency in Central Asia, and this is a potential area of backsliding.
Yeah, I feel about the Kyrgyz bill like I feel about the Georgian bill. So this is, I'm at a loss for a high-toned word to use to criticize this, but no, these are deeply regrettable. And what they do is, it is often foreign affiliated entities that shine a spotlight on corrupt behavior in these governments. I'm a great fan of OCCRP, if many of you must be familiar with that. They do great work. And these are not, it's not advantage seeking. I mean, I guarantee you that, Western governments do not sit up at night thinking, how can we destabilize the Bishkek government? But governments need to be answerable to their people, and foreign agent laws, as Russia sadly has pioneered, are corrupt ways to circumvent that.
Okay, we can take, okay, Maris, and then, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Mark Santilans. I'm a visiting scholar for the data center from Latvia. My question is about the future and energy transition. So you and Ambassador already talked about the transition that is ahead of us. That's obviously, it's not like 1 or 10 years issue, but eventually it will come. So countries are banning internal combustion engines and so forth. But the question is, what future does that promise to Kazakhstan, to Kyrgyzstan, also to Uzbekistan to a lesser degree? Because I guess that 20 years or 30, it's going to be an issue. And then what's your take on that?
As my years as an energy envoy, I used to say, the hardest concept I have to explain is not democracy, it's not human rights, it's present value. And, that's Kazakhstan or any energy-rich country can be Norway or it can be Nigeria, depending on what you do with the revenues. So at some point, oil demand is going to drop. We may already have reached peak gasoline, but that by no means means that we've reached peak oil demand. And as I mentioned before, the net zero pledges will not be borne out because they are pledges made for political reasons to find favor with domestic audiences. And the accurate projections show a future for oil and gas for some time to come. But yeah, use it everything is about using it profitably now. And those are political decisions, which determine which direction your economy goes in.
Yeah, ask the question.
Norman Kapoor, PhD candidate history in Chicago. My question is about product sharing agreements. Why Western oil companies are so secretive about them? And as a person who has worked in the energy field for years, probably has some insider knowledge, how are they actually beneficial for the citizens of Central Asia, Kazakhstan?
Yeah, on PSA, there are some commercial details that that remain commercially sensitive. I'm vaulting me back to Kazakhstan and other PSAs. First of all, and this is neutral, I don't know how secretive they are. And remember, they are negotiated with the government of that country. And the revenue streams, because of the financing, are very transparent. So any energy project is funded by a mix of international banks. The proceeds of those revenues are all very, very transparent as to where the revenue streams go and in which degrees, because the banks themselves want their money returned to them. Again, I'm just sorry, you caught me out on the detail. I don't think there is that much to it. And in any case, the details for global companies, publicly traded companies on exchanges, are far more transparent than the deals you see with Russian or even Chinese companies. When I look at the Chinese Turkmen gas deal, that is a black box to me. So also with Russian deals. But you have a PSA structure and or a royalty structure. And you have one of those two worldwide, whether you're doing business again in the North Sea or in Central Asia. One point, let me tack on here. It's critical for a company to be able to what we call book reserves. That is, have a legal right to a share of the production for an oil field. Because that is what an oil and gas company's value is based on. How many barrels of oil or oil equivalent gas they have to justify their share price. It's a measure that can be used industry-wide. Sometimes oil and gas companies are told, we will not do a PSA with you. We won't do a royalty agreement with you, but we'll pay you on a service contract basis. We'll pay you, call it 150 million a year to run and operate this project for us. No serious company will ever do that. Everyone wants to be able to book reserves. So I'm sorry I've given an inadequate answer to your question, but I hope this leads in a productive direction.
Okay, our time is, can we take one more question? One more question. Okay, Mira.
Hi, I'm Mira from Indiana University Bloomington. And my question is regarding the CPC pipeline and particularly the crude oil that is being exported from Kazakhstan. Do you think there will be at any time a risk for the Kazakh oil to be exported due to the fact that it's get blended at some point with Russian oil, which is called CPC blend?
Yeah, that's a great question. The oil comes out, where is it? Yeah, So the oil comes through Kazakhstan, and in Russia, it's mixed with, forget the blend, but there's Russian oil that goes into it. When it's sold at Novorossiysk and put on the tankers, that's called CPC blend. And it's a very, very well-known and valued blend that goes, I think, principally to European refineries. The problem CPC has is not with the fuel mix. Problem CPC has is with Russian government interference in the pipeline. And when the pipeline was structured in the Yeltsin years, it was very firmly insulated from Moscow interference. And in those early years, Moscow did not have designs to interfere. Things have changed in the neo-Soviet Putin era. So the CPC pipeline has been the subject of different quote unquote technical stoppages, different attempts to take over the governance of the pipeline. And it is very prudent for the Kazakhstan owners of Kazakh crude to start looking at transport across the Caspian, which is happening now by tanker. And that's really expensive. But I would love to see the fruition of an Octal BTC oil pipeline undersea the Caspian.
It's realistic.
Right now, a former head of Kazmunaygas told me 20 years ago, he said there are 6,000 kilometers of oil pipelines in the Caspian already. And he's right, those are production pipelines. So yes, you have oil pipelines crisscrossing the Caspian from the Russian sector on south. And a Trans-Caspian gas pipeline has been a no-brainer for 30 years. That would be an uncomplicated one to lay across.
A small one or a big one?
It depends on the commercial arrangement. Pipelines begin at the upstream, but gas pipelines have to have a reliable consumer at the downstream. You are not going to spend billions of dollars unless you have contracts in hand for someone who credibly pledges to buy that gas. So yeah, right now you could start off with a tiny little production offshoot for Trans-Caspian gas, and you could ramp it up much larger. But that will require serious commercial negotiations.
Okay, and on that note, let's close the session. Let's give a round of applause